The word soul, when in reference to video games or film or something like that, has pretty much lost all meaning from being inconsistently used, because the topics it's meant to represent are already vague. Depending on who you ask, it could mean either artistic integrity, atmosphere, identity, attention to detail, or even just developer passion, deriving the word soul from the heart and soul the developers poured into the game. It's an already very vague word that carries behind it a very vague meaning, and is ineffective as a measure of anything in and of itself. There's just no way to quantify it, much less use it as a medium for comparison. So with that all being said, let's talk about some soulless games. One game market in particular is filled to the brim with these awful, shitty, soulless cash grabs. To the surprise of absolutely no one, mobile gaming is shit. There are gems for sure, but any market that lets fucking Torque Dance 3D become the second best game has some problems. This game has 10 million downloads with a 4.0 average star rating. What the fuck are these reviews? Good game and concept. I would add more character skins, give players ability to customize characters, and add in-game sound/volume. Did a real person leave this review? Come on, mate. Good game and concept.
You gotta be kidding me.
Alright, listen, mobile games are shit. A lot of these newer mobile games for some reason have adopted these flat-colored, people-shaped fucking things, and they're super dull and annoying. Remember when games strived to have unique and memorable character designs? That wasn't even too long ago, but now these developers are deliberately trying to make their game look as dull and generic and fucking standard as possible, ripping the souls out of these little people to leave them as these hollow things that are as vaguely humanoid as the word soul is vaguely useful in video game commentary. It's reminiscent of that awful corporate art style that's only goal is to be as safe as possible by making the characters represent absolutely no one. I understand mobile gaming will never be able to match or even fill the same market as PC and console gaming. Lots of people just like to have an easy dopamine dispenser while they wait on the transporter before going to bed. That isn't wrong, but there are ways of creating mobile games that have some life and look as though someone actually cared about the game they were making. And these games do fortunately make it to the top sometimes. But if the top games have shown me anything, it's that the more shit you throw at the wall, the more chance you have that something will stick, even if that means rolling out any creativity. And thus you have this sheer mountain of shit being funneled into the mobile game market. Oh, but Patrick, these games take time and effort, and you shouldn't be so mean to them. Listen, I'm not saying you can't put effort in and make great mobile games, even as a solo developer. What I am saying is that a lot of these games use basically the same boring, probably pre-made assets, and then they're mixed together to make a shitty game, which, by the way, is not very hard. What? Show you? Alright, fine, I'll show you. Step 1, go onto the Unity Asset Store or some other equivalent and find some hyper-casual people models. There are lots of them out there, but if you can't find any you like or just don't want to spend money on this shit, you can make your own, but if you do, be wary because you may actually start to feel proud of what you're making, or worse, put some character into your game. It's safer to just add cubes like this. Step 2, add some cubes for the player and give them a nav mesh agent. Add some gray people things that you can pick up to add to your party. The sphere is just a debugging tool for the nav mesh agent. The model will be removed later. Step 3, create some very basic scripts for controlling the player. Make sure your scripts don't exceed a few dozen lines. Just add touch controls and mouse controls for me for debugging, and shoot a raycast to check if it hit ground. Then move the nav mesh target to the hit point. Step 4, add some saws and walls and create a few more basic scripts for them. And wow, would you look at that. This took me like a single hour. Give me the rest of the day for levels, user interface, let me pay for those shitty assets, and add some other giblets, and you're ready for the App Store, baby. Oh yeah. Time and effort and And we all know why these games are made. They're pumped out at machine gun rates, often in a matter of single days, by developers with no passion for what they're making, so that whatever publisher they work with can absolutely fucking load them with ads to squeeze out as much as they can. Oh, and by the way, did you catch that? This is actually an entirely different game, published by an entirely different publisher. You'd be forgiven for not even realizing it because they adopt the exact same format, using these shitty, lifeless, pre-made assets. There's certainly a lot more to say about mobile games, like predatory monetization, developers working because it offers a sense of security in an otherwise unstable video game market, how these companies pump their games full of ads to the point where you can't play more than a minute without seeing a minute of ad. Just as a side note though, I thought I'd mention that there is a lot of these weird games with a girl with a weird walking animation and she just walks down the path. There are seriously dozens of these games, and all of them are by different developers and by different publishers. I understand that a publisher's goal is to hire devs and then monetize their games, but these publishers flood the market with bad games and load them full of ads. The main bad game publishers I encountered were Rolla Games, Freeplay Inc., Voodoo, Line Studios, and Zynga. There's no doubt more, but these were the ones that kept showing their ugly names plastered on shit game after shit game. I think one of the more insulting things is that because there's a lot of talented devs coming to these publishers, if there were any life in these companies, some of these games would be fun. At least if they weren't riddled with ads to the point where the amount of time you spend watching ads equals the amount of playtime. Imagine if YouTube videos were like that. Like, after every minute of watching this video, I hit you with a fucking 60-second long ad for a different YouTube video. Like, geez, man, loot boxes and cosmetic microtransactions are far better than this. I don't blame developers, by the way, at least not most developers, because making games in a few days while having a publisher is far less risky than trying to make money on your own. It's just unfortunate then that because of the amount of money that these publishers make from the amount of ads they put on, and because these publishers give your game the best chance of going viral, that many talented developers go to them only for their games to be turned into these money machines with no life. But that's all for a video for another time. For now, it's time to talk about a very different market.
I hate this channel.
No!
I'm not the first person to talk about modern AAA games being devoid of any life or luster, and although it's extreme to say video games as a whole are declining or on a downward spiral or some other fucking grand statement like that, the truth is that a lot of modern AAA games follow a formula. The video game market is highly saturated. Even for these mega companies, it can be risky designing new games with new game mechanics. It's just safer to follow the same formula you've been using for years, continually babyfying these games with each generation to make them even more consumer friendly, and generating these dull, soulless husks like a robotic algorithm.
Where's the love?
Not all modern big business games are like this, but quite a lot of them unfortunately are. The idea that indie game soul and AAA soulless I see brought up quite a bit, and to be fair, even watching this video you could get the idea that I think that.
Get a load of this fucking hipster!
Oh, please.
And it does have some merit, but it isn't how it seems. Indie games are willing to take more gameplay risks and create gameplay based off gimmicks or little tricks. These are things AAA games will never be able to do. Not only are they usually too risky, but you often can't build an $80 game around a simple gimmick the way an indie game can. AAA games are also often trying to look as realistic as possible. This has two effects. For one, a lot of them end up looking very similar if they're set in the same setting, like a modern Battlefield or something. And two, it prevents indie games from copying that look because they won't have the manpower to recreate it. This requires indie games to develop visual styles that are unique, and if they can't, you'll never hear about them. On average, there were over 200 games released every week last year just to Steam alone, to give you any idea of how many indie games are created nowadays.
We've had more flops and more misses with AAA gaming than we have had in the indie category lately.
This is beyond wrong. It's just that you never hear about the literal thousands of failed indie games. I now want to try and go back to the beginning of this video where I listed off what soul could mean to different people, because although the word soul has been muddied to oblivion and was already vague to begin with, I also think it's fun to dissect, and looking at these games, the best way to describe them is just soulless. So call me a pretentious loser all you want, but I'm going to keep going. Identity and stylization, having a distinct style, this goes back to indie games that are often deemed soulful just on their visuals alone. It's also another reason many modern games feel so homogenous. Their graphics all blend together like a bowl of porridge. Pick a random Call of Duty game that was released within the last 5 years and tell me of the individual identity it has. Same goes for those fucking awful mobile games that try their hardest to have as little style as possible. I should note here that this doesn't just apply to visuals, but rather the whole atmosphere of the game, including music, gameplay, story, sound effects, lore, and everything else that comes with video games. It sounds like I'm just saying that better games have soul and worse ones don't.
I have no soul.
But I'm not. The COD games have great graphics and, you know, solid gameplay that's clearly working, and are generally very polished, but nothing is unique about them. Artistic integrity is a difficult balance. It isn't just as simple as, well, the game designer should be free to perfect his craft. Unless it's an indie game made by a hobby dev, that isn't viable. Artistic integrity also applies to the whole game, not just the visuals. Many a tale there is of a dev team so set on making their perfect game, with every game mechanic they want implemented, and every piece of game design as fine-tuned as it can be. At some point you need to sacrifice artistic integrity to turn any profit at all. It's rare for games to come out where you can tell little artistic integrity was sacrificed. The difficulty is when you want too much profit and sacrifice too much artistic integrity, to the point where your game is filled with pay-to-win upgrades or loot boxes or whatever. I don't hate developers or companies trying to monetize their game. I'm all for it, just don't go overboard with pay-to-win aspects like EA, or by far the worst way to monetize a game, which is infinite ads. And also don't just resell the same game every year, like EA.
Punching bag. We're just gonna take a saw and just cut this thing in half.
I can't imagine that any of these games are anyone's vision. I seriously wouldn't doubt if someone told me that there isn't a single person working on NBA 2K22 that has any passion left at all. From the outside, it looks like every person involved in these games is just doing it for a paycheck. Speaking of that, developer passion is important. Indie devs again have an advantage here, as it's far easier to be passionate about your own project than it is a larger one with up to a few hundred different people working on it, though lead game designers with passion are what really matters in that instance. I know I don't need to explain why passion is important in pretty much every creative facet in existence, but the shortest answer ever as to why it is that passion encourages a creative output and improves the quality of your work by weakening the effects of the "it's good enough" mentality, along with other positive benefits. And then attention to detail, which is really just a result of developer passion, but it isn't always going to be there with it. Really, extra details is a sign of developer passion and artistic integrity, depending on the level of detail, of course. Little things that aren't needed for the game but enhance the experience. Creating respectable games that fits all that takes a lot of time, talent, and a shit ton of love. All of this sounds pretty broad, but I'm trying to define soul when in reference to video games. Cut me some slack here, it'll be vague regardless. But I think you'll find that games you would consider soulless husks almost always have none of these attributes, and games with soul you'll find have at least one or two. Remember, it's not just a measure of quality or gameplay quality, in fact it really isn't a measure of anything at all. Just think of it as this, and this, or better yet, just don't think of it as anything at all. Don't use it, it's vague and just stupid. I'm just having a bit of fun really, but please don't go around calling games soulless or soulful based on anything I've said. You risk looking like more of a pompous dick than I do making this video. The term is still very inconsistent, and you're much better off using specific wording unless you're referring to an overall theme or something like that. But still, these games are so fucking soulless, holy shit. Before you go, if you have anything to add, I do read every comment. If you liked this video, please consider liking this video, and subscribe if you'd like to see more like it. Alright, goodbye.